Whoop, where did that come from? Welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis, your host. I think I'm overloaded in images is how this happened. Uh, all right, behind the scenes here. It always happens when you're going live. I have a lot of images to show tonight, and that's why that one in particular just popped up. But a great guest, she was on back in 2021, Caz Clarke from the Pentyrch UFO incident that happened back in 2016 in February 26th, I think. That's all off the top of my head. I believe that's what it was. I'll be corrected if not, because she is a lady of detail, great detail, and it's fascinating what she has been through. And the reason she's back is to talk about what has happened with this case all this time. Just a couple of things behind the scenes. And well, to let you know, first of all, next week is a very important week. I'm going to be up in North Carolina, and Jonathan Wigand and Michael Harara, both Marines that had Marine encounters, are going to be on together. And I will, I'll have Mike on my online studio, but Jonathan and I will be in the same room together up in North Carolina, an apartment I rented up there for this. So it should be a very, very interesting show. So don't forget to mark that down on your calendars. It's one not to miss for sure. So just to tell you, the blog this week is basically breaking news, and it's called "The UFO over Verenzano Narrows." I am mispronouncing that, I'm sure. New York. This just happened. Like I think it was very recently. And anyway, there's going to be an audio out on that as well. It should be really interesting. There's a lot of images online about that, and it was on the news, and it's pretty interesting. So make sure you check that out. And I do believe that's it. I want to thank everyone that listens to the show and everyone that supports the show. Thank you all. And it's been a great journey. I'm enjoying it just as much as ever. And here's our guest, Caz. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Martin, and hello, everybody watching around the world tonight, and especially you guys in the United States.
That's right. I saw you were on a few shows, but you were actually in the UK. You were on a couple of the shows in the last 8 months or something like that. So you haven't been on any shows in the United States for quite a while, I would say.
Well, I've kind of been doing a virtual American tour.
Is that right? I missed
it. Quite recently.
I see. Okay. Yep.
But I came back to you because I wanted to kind of come full circle. I think we spoke back in 2021.
Yes.
When I told you what happened. And I think for people that don't know much about this case, it's important that you do know. I'm sure that Martin will tag the original show, which goes into some detail about what happened.
That's what I'm going to do. It will be, just to elaborate on that, that will be down in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, etc., that will be down in the text, a link to the original show where Caz goes into really, really intense, great detail of this situation. But in realizing that, and for the amount of time that we have tonight, I wanted her to give a condensed version for the person that has never heard about this really incredible story that happened. And did I get the date right? February 26, 2016?
You did indeed, yes.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Memory's not totally failing. So yes, if you wouldn't mind giving a kind of a nutshell of exactly what happened that night.
Okay. I live in a very small village and in an elevated position in Wales. And we had these two military aircraft taking it in turns for 3 days and 3 nights continuously, watching the skies above. And the Ministry of Defence didn't answer us, and the mainstream media ignored us. They didn't know anything either. And it was quite clear they were watching for something. But what we didn't know, and certainly I never anticipated, was that they were watching for a huge interdimensional or transdimensional pyramid UFO that jettisoned smaller craft. And we now know pursued and shot down at least 3 of those craft in the South Wales region in Llantrisant in the early hours of February 26, 2016.
And you have this basically all documented. I mean, you went into intense research, and you can elaborate a little more than that. You had a witness, Dave, and I wanted to ask you about him. your neighbor who you both witnessed it together, has he ever spoken out about this? I know he would only do it with friends and people he knew, but has he gone public at all talking?
He has given one interview to Yvette Fielding, but it was an audio only to protect his identity. But of course, David's not the only witness. Jacob Coleman is also a primary witness and has come forward, and he witnessed the green object in a standoff with the Apache helicopters at the Llantrisant end. We've got Richard Woodward, who also saw the pyramid that night that flew over the top of him in Pontyclun, which is just a little west of Llantrisant.
And may I show? I'm just going to show an artist rendition, or this is something that you may have created.
No, it's a graphic design that I had made, but
I see.
There's a little bit more detail in that than what was actually seen. In fact, on the night, the triangles of red lights were completely black until it reached near the ground and that hand of lightning came out of it. And around the brightest lights, you could see the texture of the craft. So not the entire side lit up, but around those brightest lights, you could see this was a solid craft and not just a string of lights, for example.
And okay, since we're right here, were you close enough to try to understand the approximate size in this in meters?
We now can estimate the size of it, one, because of the EMF trail that it left behind, two, the angle from where I viewed it from and the distance that it was. We now know that this thing was around about 1,000 foot per side.
And are you aware that there is another case that happened called the Cash Landrum case, that there was a pyramid-shaped object?
Vaguely, but I don't know the case in detail.
There is some discussion whether that might have been, advanced technology, possibly nuclear propulsion that was being tested at the time. Nothing's ever been confirmed, but I just wanted to ask you that question because that's you don't hear pyramids too often, and that was just another case.
If this was ours, they would not have set an ambush for it with 3.8 or $4.5 billion worth of equipment. If this was ours, they would have done this over military defense land and not over private land in a residential area next to a hospital. If this was ours, they would not have pursued and shot them down.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not insinuating it was ours in any way.
No.
I'm just telling you that's what some people have only speculated. There's no proof that the case in Texas that I was talking about could possibly have been a nuclear propulsion test. But
this was kind of transdimensional. This came through the space. It didn't come down from outer space. It emerged.
You saw it emerge?
Yes.
It just appeared?
Yes, gradually.
And
it came in point first, side on, and the leading set of 6 lights on its near side edge facing me were brighter than the rest, almost as if that edge were the steering mechanism for the whole thing. So the lights on the right-hand side as it came down in a pendulum motion. And once it was in the upright position, it's jettisoned this really bright green object, and it was the brightest object of them all. Not the barrels.
Oh, that's the barrels. Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what shape that was because it was so bright. But Jacob Coleman got a better look at it, and he said it was like the back of it was almost like sheets in the wind, like it was moving in a standoff, almost like it was agitated. It was afraid, almost.
And so this is really interesting because and when a situation where you say something's appearing, then it makes you think of possibly that it did not come from, an extraterrestrial source, that it could be some type of a dimensional type of situation. And
well, they were watching for it, for real.
So if they were, you think so they were patrolling for days. So they were watching for something, and I wonder how they could have gotten tipped off somehow that this thing was going to appear.
Okay, the information that I've had is that the military are monitoring for a frequency via the satellites. to know when these craft are, quote, going to appear, not come down from outer space. And they seem to be using the ley lines, or where ley lines converge, as some form of conduit. This is the information that's come down the line. And so they were monitoring. I don't know if you want to show the first slide, because we've now identified the two reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft. The Hawker Beechcraft Shadow R1, Snake 48, its call sign, is an above top secret aircraft. And we can't find out very much about this aircraft other than it was taken out of service in 2012 and brought back into service in 2014, having had some serious top secret refit. Now, these aircraft, both the Britten-Norman Army aircraft, which is also a reconnaissance surveillance aircraft, and the Hawker Beechcraft, have civilian transponders, which is why we were able to track them on radar. And they have private transponders because they're actually put out in the private security sector, which is interesting. We have their radar returns for the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th of February 2016, where they flew in circles and figure-8 formations for 3 days and 3 nights continuously. And they didn't leave the airspace unwatched, not for a single minute. The second aircraft would turn up before the first aircraft would leave, after an 8-hour shift, off to refuel and rest. And then it would come back the next morning, and then the other aircraft would leave. But it was the Snake 48 that was there during the event. And these are their radar returns. You can see the number of circles that they've done. The next slide would have been the 24th and 25th, right? This is the NATO E3 Sentry, the NATO E3 Sentry that turned up that night.
They call that's like a Hawkeye, they call it. That's another term for something similar, but that is a propeller-run plane, the Hawkeye. It's for a higher altitude, but that's for radar, very high-definition radar. I'm sure this is the same.
Yes, it's Air Command.
Oh, Air Command.
And they get their information directly from the satellites, so that they can deal with a real-time combat force.
Wow.
Now, when we looked into this, I mean, Gary Jones has been absolutely fantastic when it's come to this investigation, and he's literally been my right-hand man. The next slide, which talks about ISTAR, and it's intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance. And ISTAR stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, Target Acquisition, and Reconnaissance. In its macroscopic sense, ISTAR is a practice that links several battlefields functions together to assist a combat force in employing its sensors and managing the information they gather. This is the retrieval team. What went on that night was the whole thing. And I've spoken to people in aviation, and they have confirmed the aircraft involved are part of the retrieval teams. So this whole thing, these reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft and the E3 Sentry are clearly linked in this ISTAR program. You've seen the graphics. An interesting point. At the moment that craft appeared, the temperature dropped by a full 5 degrees. We have that information directly from, let's see if I can get it up now.
Is that something you actually felt? Did you feel like a difference in temperature when you were observing?
Absolutely. It was absolutely freezing. I remember when I came in that night, I was dead cold. Like you touch a piece of meat in the chill counter, that cold. I've never been so cold in my life. But the frightening thing for me that I didn't find out until much later was we actually lost an hour and a half in time that night. And because it happened to me, I didn't know. It was only when Gary discovered the time of the explosion, where they shot that green object down, that my stomach literally flipped. Because for me, I was only out at the gate watching all of this that overlooks the farmland behind my house for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And that craft appeared at around 2:30 a.m. And I've jokingly said to Gary many times what they were waiting for was for me to drop my hanky to start their multi-billion-dollar operation.
Huh.
So, I couldn't have pinpointed that time because I couldn't have seen the aircraft around me. There are 20 helicopter gunships in every direction, 20 miles out. So I couldn't have seen that from my position.
Well, let me ask you this. So if this came into our being, and obviously we knew, your country, military, or even NATO, I guess, supposedly knew the thing was coming into being, then they would also, it seems to me that they would have the technology to understand that there's a problem if they do come in. I mean, why didn't they, I mean, now I'm talking logic, like I would think, or we would think, or whatever, but we have no idea what it is that's thinking what. But why wouldn't it want to flee when it sees that, we are a hostile race? And that was pretty obvious.
I think they're very concerned with our hostility. What upset me was that there was no attempt to communicate. There was no hand of friendship extended from our part. Our military set an ambush for these things and then pursued and shot down without mercy. Now, when President Trump announced having an armed Space Force on a level with the Air Force, separate but equal, think about how large your Air Force is. What are they flying in? Why do we need the military in space? Why are they armed? Because they're not up there doing satellite patrols. You can't shoot a cyber attack with a bullet. Cyber attacks come from Earth, not from space. And it's not just the United States that has an armed Space Force. France has an armed Space Force. The United Kingdom has an armed Space Force. So what exactly are they flying around in up there? Because that's something they haven't told us about. And the military do not have carte blanche to do what they like, when they like, and where they like, especially over private land in the UK. They must have permission to do so, and they had no permission to do what they did that night. They breached every aviation law. They broke their own avoidance policy within the Ministry of Defence, which is so serious that it involves royal households, and we have the evidence to prove it. What the military did that night was totally illegal and unjust. And they might say, or they have said to me, I do not have a right to know. But when it comes to something on a planetary scale, we, the people, have a right to know. When it involves everybody, and there are witnesses out there that I have not had the privilege of speaking to just yet, but I know they're there. And they're probably sitting in their homes right now saying, well, it's nothing to do with me. It won't affect me. But they're wrong. They're already involved. We're already involved. The military have involved us, and we're not even supposed to know they exist. And that's a very, very serious situation indeed.
Now, this the shoot down thing. Well, maybe I'm getting a little too far ahead, but I if I remember from the first initial interview, that was something like 40 kilometers or something like that away, or I forget. Oh, was that close?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Was that close? And I know you went in pursuit of looking to see what happened, and we can get into all that later. But can we talk about when you witnessed these barrels? Because I think that's fascinating. These things came out. Is this kind of a close depiction of what you saw?
Very close. The only difference would be that the barrels, inside the barrels, it looked like white noise on a TV screen. But it was moving, like it was mixing in on itself. Almost like, and I've said before, they were alive, like it was life encapsulated in these things. And I said at the time, I believed like they were made of glass, even though I didn't touch them. And now we have a witness that drove through the debris field of one of these barrels that night. And they told me that it was like giant chunks of crystal, red and white crystal,
Hmm.
which
And
is very interesting.
so you were fairly close to this whole
They came
thing.
to us, yeah.
And it makes me also wonder, because there was I remember you said your phone died, so there was some type of electromagnetic situation possibly, and possibly radiation. And what I wanted to ask you, and I didn't ask you this last time, have you ever had any ill effects from this encounter?
Yeah, nearly killed me. They were small things at first, and I never really put the two and two together. My hair turned completely white within 24 hours. I became anaphylactic, and I wasn't anaphylactic before. And then I nearly died. I nearly died.
And can you describe what happened? I mean, were you hospitalized?
I did go to hospital, yes.
Hmm.
In fact, it was blues and twos all the way because I nearly died. In fact, the consultant was quite shocked that I was still stood in front of him. But, there are a few papers out there now that will explain the effects of high EMF and what the effects are on the human body, which is another reason why people should be told, not because necessarily that they're a threat, but the energy that these craft let off, if you like, are extremely harmful to human beings.
Hmm.
Indirectly.
Yeah.
But, yes.
And I mean, people have said things like, perhaps it's like a side effect of propulsion or whatever, but not intentional and harming,
Right.
whatever life around them. I would, I mean, that's all speculation as well, but still. So a couple of things I was thinking. I wondered if we could have some questions called in, if we could open the lines at some point. But I know you have a lot to say, and the reason I'm talking about the phone lines is because we're only going to be on KGRA for about another, 35 minutes or so. But we do have the phone capability there. Or if you'd like to keep moving on, we could continue on.
I think what I'd like to do is get into the comments. If we could go to slide 14.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's important because these were the comments made on Wells Online, which are our mainstream media here.
Okay.
And,
all right.
I'm skipping out a lot.
Okay, that's fine. Yep.
Because this is talking about, the helicopters, the explosions by people that heard them and experienced them. But the important comment is at the bottom. And that was made by Wells Online themselves, who said that they were still working on a story about this. And they'll post the link as soon as they have it. And that was at 3:39 in the morning of the 26th of February, 2016.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the reason why that is so important, I'll get into a bit later, but there must be a press briefing. And clearly there wasn't one for an exercise, because that's what it's been alleged, that this was just a military exercise. For something of this scale, there must be a press briefing, and clearly they didn't know. So I don't want to get into all of the details. I mean, there are images of the crash site that I'd like to show, and also the fact that they did a meticulous metal search on Llantrisant Common using helicopters, troops on the ground at 4:30 in the morning in what the military call silent hours. So they shouldn't have even been there. Now, we do have a freedom of information from the Ministry of Defence. In fact, we have a few. I believe it's slide 18, where we asked the Ministry of Defence why they conducted this meticulous metal search in the very early hours of the 26th of February 2016. And they claimed Section 26, which is defence, national security. So bits of old bike and bits of old washing machine are so important that they had to pick them up at 4:30 in the morning and wake everybody up. But it's now national security. So I advise everybody, especially those in the UK, that if there's an abandoned washing machine at the end of your street, that you phone your Ministry of Defence and tell them there's a national security risk, because that's how outrageous that answer is. The next slide, the very next slide, is some of the images of the crash site. It takes an enormous amount of energy to snap a tree, but there were these 6 trees at the end of the debris field, because all the canopies of the trees were out into this area, and these trees are snapped off clean, and that's an impossibility in nature in a local, just one area. Now, we have witnesses now that were in Smilog Woods that night, that saw the object on the ground, that were assaulted, arrested, illegally searched, and forcibly removed from the area by the military that night, which is a breach of international humanitarian law. The military had absolutely no permission to be there that night, because we've had that from Wales on National Resources for Wales, and we have that via Freedom of Information. So this is some of the evidence that I want to get into a bit later on.
Okay, let me ask you this. This particular area where the trees are, what type of land is that? Who is that owned by?
National Resources for Wales.
Oh, that's what you're saying. Okay, I
Yes.
see. So it's like we would say here in the United States, it would be like, a preserve, or
It's Forestry Commission, yeah. If we just skip straight on to slide 21, and these are images of the strange men and women that came and camped in the fields here of Pentyrch just after the event. There was no planning permission for these people to be there for a change of use of the land, because this is farmland, so no planning permission for a campsite, and there was no planning permission to do a survey on that land either. Now, these people gave 2 fake cover stories as to their identity. Firstly, they said they were a fracking survey team, which did not go down very well in the village. And then they said they were Vodafone, which is over here, a mobile phone network. But they tried to avoid being questioned. They behaved very strangely. They were searching the field where the pyramid emerged, wearing white forensic suits on their hands and knees. Now, there's a public footpath that runs through there, where you can see the Jeep at the end of the trail there. And every time you walk past them, they would all stop what they were doing, stand up and stare at you until you were out of sight. Now, without these few photographs, there would be no evidence those people were ever there. And we had to ask the Ministry of Defence multiple times, and that's what I want to get into next, about these people, because the Ministry of Defence denied any knowledge of them. But eventually, I got them to admit these people were military and they were armed. So why would the military, in this covert operation, pretend to be civilians and give 2 fake cover stories as to who they were, when it is their duty to tell me who they are?
Well, they wouldn't. I suppose that one could say that these tents were made to look like they were not military, because these are just, just little pop tents that, you would buy at a camping store.
And I've said before, you can take the man out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the man. And these tents are absolutely perfect. Every drawstring is absolutely perfect. If I'd gone camping with my friends, for example, I'd have been tripping over people's drawstrings in the middle of the night. This was perfection. But if we can get into some of the evidence now,
Sure.
Slide 22, which is the very next slide.
All right.
And this is some of the MOD's denials and contradictions. And the details and the reference numbers are on these slides, which is the Freedom of Information 12120. I'm writing to request information regarding the military exercise that took place in the fields of Pentyrch, adjacent to Tinnicoid Road and the rear of the Sarn estate, between the 1st of February 2016 and the 30th of April 2016. Local residents, they were told they were conducting a military exercise in case of an emergency situation. Why were the residents not told that the military were conducting an exercise there And the Ministry of Defence's response was that they held no information within the scope of our request. So going on to the very next slide, because these are important. These are two separate freedom of informations. And again, the references are at the top of the slide. Why did you send a cleanup crew after the event? What were they searching for? And why were they carrying guns? The Ministry of Defence's earlier freedom of information request reference is enclosed. As stated in the MOD's response dated the 24th of October 2018, no information is held in the scope of your request. A further search has been conducted, and I can confirm the Ministry of Defence holds no information in the scope of your request. So that's the second denial. So we asked again, if this was just an exercise, why use the fields of Pentyrch when Sennybridge, which is MOD land, is just up the road? And why were the residents not notified this was happening in advance? And then they said, as stated in the MOD's response dated 24th of October, some of the information in the scope of your request is held. This information is withheld under Section 26. Well, they didn't say some. They denied it twice. But we'll get straight on to the next one while I'm on this subject, because then we wrote to Joint Forces Command Headquarters. Why were the soldiers carrying automatic weapons that did not have yellow caps in the end of the barrel, implying they were carrying live rounds? Information is withheld under Section 26. However, under Section 16, duty to provide advice and assistance, may wish to be aware that military personnel were issued with blank simulated ammunition for this exercise. Well, no exercise has ever been listed for these people to this date. And finally, why were the military in the fields of Pentyrch during this time? Not a fracking survey team, not Vodafone, the military. And that information is withheld under Section 26. Well, all of this took place over private land, not over Ministry of Defence land. And on private land, they must have permission. But just going on to bring this round into a full circle, about these men and women in the fields, we asked, if this was just an exercise, why did they lie about their identity and give a fake cover story as to their presence? What were they doing in the fields of Pentyrch? When approached by local residents, they impressed upon them that they were civilians, even though some were dressed in military attire. No planning permission had been granted for this campsite in those fields, but they were civilian tents and vehicles and not military. Again, I ask this, why did they lie about their identity if this was just a military exercise? And they stated that a new search for the information has now been completed within the Ministry of Defence. However, all of the information falls entirely within the exemptions provided for Section 26. Well, I knew this couldn't be right. And there are rules and regulations, so I love the ministry for this, because you don't break the rules, you follow them. And I found slide 26, this wonderful document by the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, Training Over Private Land Act. And these are their rules and regulations. So if you go straight to the very next slide, 27, I went to identification, section 26B. And these are their standing orders, not mine. Identification. All members of the services must disclose their identity and that of their unit if asked to do so by landowners and officials of National Parks or Forestry Commission. It may not always be possible for landowners and officials to be readily recognised, but any persons questioning service personnel on private land must be assumed to have a valid reason for doing so. Therefore, the utmost courtesy must be extended to them. Parties to service personnel or individuals are not to avoid any person attempting to question them, but they did, and they lied. So I wanted to know what else they were supposed to do for an exercise of this magnitude. And there must be a ministerial briefing. Ministers must be briefed in advance about large-scale military exercises involving extensive areas of the UK including training over private land. The submission must include a period of the exercise, including weekend activities, the time of the exercise, including any night activities, the number of troops, vehicles, helicopters, outside vehicles, for example, any intensive out-of-hours helicopters or fast jets activity, any foreign forces involved, of course, the Americans were here, details of any open days or media briefings, how the exercise might affect the general public, and a draft letter for the minister to send to members of parliament and members of devolved legislators whose constituents are likely to be affected by the exercise activity. Right, that's what they're supposed to do. So,
very cut and dry.
Section 20, the next one, number 29, is to the Welsh Government. So we asked the Welsh Government, can you supply information regarding the military exercise that took place on the 26th of February 2016? And they wrote back to us and said the Welsh Government neither manages military exercises in Wales nor holds any record of military exercises in Wales by date, so they were unable to provide any information. So the very next slide,
okay,
I'll try and get through them quickly, is local government. And local government in this case was the Rhondda Cynon Taf Council. I'm researching the incident on the night of the 25th and 26th of February 2016, which involved the supposed military exercise, which took place in the area of Pentyrch Common to Pentyrch, an area within which the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and the Royal Mint are located. Did the council have prior warning the exercise was taking place, and if so, how much notification was given? And their answer, that the authority was not made aware of any exercises in the area on these dates, was not made aware of any council property being damaged. So there was no letter sent to local government. And certainly we know there wasn't a press briefing, because the very next slide is the Wales Online comment that they were still currently working on a story about this, and they'll post the link as soon as they have it. So we wrote to the fire service because clearly they must have been told something. There were huge explosions going off. People's houses were shaken. The hospital shook. But the fire service didn't know anything about it either, rather than read the whole thing out. We wrote to the hospital and they told us no emergency measures or services and procedures were undertaken, as no information was passed to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital about this exercise, which I find very interesting because later they tried to change their story. The very next one, we asked the Ministry of Defence what targets were fired upon during the operation. They said that no live ammunition was used, therefore no targets were fired upon. We asked what was the cause of the 2 explosions that were heard by residents, and they state, quote, the explosions were controlled detonations of simulated munitions to assist the exercise.
And what time in the morning was that when that happened?
4:21 a.m.
Yeah, that's when they would set that off. That makes sense.
Well, witnesses said that the first explosion, and this is in the press, was an air explosion, and the second one sounded like something hit the ground in Smirnock Woods. We have the press clip where residents gave their evidence to the media and said the first explosion was an air explosion. You cannot place a simulated munition in the air, but there are certain rules and regulations too about using simulated munitions, pyrotechnics and flares on private land, because all of this happened on private land, not on Ministry of Defence land. Now, Senna Bridge, which is MOD land, as the crow flies, about 40 miles away from here. And, you know, they have 240,000 hectares of land. If they want to go up there and blow themselves up in what they call silent hours, they're more than welcome to do so. But they cannot do it over a residential area, and certainly not next to a hospital.
Now, we have a Gary Jones in the chat. Is that the?
Gary Jones has been my right-hand man. He is absolutely one of the best investigators I've ever worked with. He's one of the bravest men I know, and has asked the questions that we all want the answers to. He's absolutely brilliant. We've left no stone unturned during this investigation that's been going on now for some 8 years. And we can prove the cover-up, which I haven't even got to yet. You know, let me see what the next one is a second, which I think is, yes. Slide 35, which is ammunition and pyrotechnics, is going back to Training Over Private Land Act, Section 30A, B and D. And it says, special attention is to be paid to any restrictions imposed by the landowner on the use of blank ammunition, pyrotechnics, or other training materials. When permission has been given for the use of live ammunition or pyrotechnics, units are to warn the local police, and on no account should red flares be used for any training purpose. And that's important because what I call my not so learned friends, my debunkers, have said that's what I saw, flares. Well, the very next slide, which is 36, this was done independently. I only found this out later from a Miss Martin, who put a Freedom of Information request in and asked, I would like to request information regarding exercise Chameleon that took place in Pentyrch and Llantrisant area, South Wales, on the 25th and 26th of February 2016. Can you tell me if there were any aircraft flares set off during the exercise? If so, what time were they set off? And if so, what location were they set off? And a search for the information has now been completed within the Ministry of Defence. And I can confirm that no information in the scope of your request is held because they're not allowed to use flares over private land. And just to get into the last thing about this Training Over Private Land Act, it says, the very next slide, a detailed recce and written consent. Once authority has been given, it is the unit's responsibility to carry out a detailed recce, decide upon the suitability of the area, obtain the owner's written consent. The written consent must reach the brigade a minimum of 21 days before training is due to start, and the brigade can authorise training as soon as the owner's written consent is received. Well, we know the Rhondda Cynon Taf Council owns some of the land, and we know they didn't know anything about this exercise. So they didn't get permission from them. But the very next slide, which is slide 38, is from National Resources for Wales. And these are the people that own Smilog Woods and the surrounding areas. I'm writing in respect of your follow-up request for the information. Why was Smilog Woods closed to the public during this time, 25th and 26th of February 2016? What exactly is the reason for the military being in Smilog Woods during this time? Whose authority was it to close the woods to the public during this time? And why were the roads closed down in the areas of Llantrisant and around Smilog Woods during this time? And they answered us. There was no permission granted to the military to close the woodland and the public paths and to let off explosives in the woodlands mentioned during these dates, or in fact, any dates. So we have no records. This type of activity would have required permission. So if it had occurred, we'd have had a record. Therefore, Regulation 12.4a, Environmental Information Regulations 2004 applies. Information not held. So they did not get permission from the landowner. Now, yeah.
There's smoking guns left and right here.
Oh, I'm just getting started, Martin, because I came to you the very first time because you're one of the best people in the world at outing a charlatan. And I am not a charlatan. Gary and I have pushed this investigation. We have taken on the Ministry of Defence and South Wales Police and the other the authorities involved. And I will show you and the rest of the world today that they lied, they covered it up. I can prove their lies. I can prove they covered it up. And they tried to cover the cover story with yet another cover story. But we'll get there, and I'll try and do this as quickly as possible.
I'm going to go extra time, so we'll have the time after KGRA is gone. But I did want to ask you this question in the middle of all this: what was the police's, whatever you call them there, what was their response to this whole situation?
Oh, I've got a whole thing on South Wales Police, We had them facing criminal charges, and I'll show you that as we go through.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well,
All right.
the hospital,
I
funnily
have
enough,
to when I just let you know that because I had the maximum amount of slides in here, I'm going to be loading up some as we go. So you go
okay.
right ahead. Mhm.
Well, the next slide, which is slide 39,
All right.
and there's evidence of absence. The hospital tried to change their story. We wrote to them on the 26th of February 2016, a military exercise took place in the area around the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. You stated in a previous Freedom of Information that no information was given to you. I've since discovered that a large explosion took place sometime after 4 a.m. on the same date. Sometime after this, security were notifying concerned employees and staff at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital that this was an exercise and the hospital services were not required. So as you had no prior notification, who could you please answer the following questions? Who notified the hospital by telephone after 4 a.m. on the 26th of February 2016 that their services were not required after the explosion? And who notified the hospital security that this was a result of a military exercise, and how? And their response was, please accept our apologies for our previous response. But new information has come to light. We can confirm that the Health Board's Civil Contingency Manager at the time was notified by South Wales Police in advance of this exercise. Interesting.
That is.
Further to the notification, the switchboard and security were informed of the event and that no involvement would be required. Well, clearly this needs investigating. And Gary and I certainly did that. So we move on to the next slide.
And that is number 40. Yep.
Yet again, when we asked them about this prior notification, now the Freedom of Information itself has gone missing, but our answer, our response to them is still there.
Excuse me, can you tell me what slide number this is?
This should be, hang on one second. This slide should be 40.
Oh, okay.
Slide 40. So we're on the right one.
Yep.
In your reply, you referred twice to a police counter-terrorism drill and not the military exercise we specifically asked you about. The police counter-terrorism drill took place in June of 2016, and the military exercise took place on the 26th of February 2016. I would like to think that there is some confusion on your end and not the idea that perhaps the Trust were deliberately trying to merge these two separate exercises as one. We asked for specific details of the military exercise and not the police counter-terrorism drill. If the Trust were given prior notification of the military exercise in February of 2016, can the Trust please provide details of that notification, including date and time? And then they said, I apologise for any confusion caused by our previous response. I bet they do. To the information request. To clarify, the Health Board's Civil Contingencies Manager at the time was notified by South Wales Police, and they've taken an extract from the email. So we have this blue font. Now, I'm not a computer genius, Martin, but even I can type in a different colour font. So South Wales Police have notified me that they will be conducting 2 counter-terrorism exercises from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. on the 25th and 26th of February, and all day on the 21st of June. There is no mention of a military exercise. We have used the wording that was used in the email sent to staff relating to this exercise on the 25th and 26th of February 2016. Well, this really needs investigating. So the very next slide, which is slide 41, we pressed them for the email. We wanted proof that they'd received this email, if at all, because typing in a different font doesn't do it for me, and for me isn't proof. But they upheld from the internal review that we asked for, and again we get the same blue font and the same answers. So the very next one we asked, which is slide 42, and we asked South Wales Police for some of the transcripts and some of the telephone calls from some of the hundreds of people that phoned in that night. Now, the hospital told us that they told their staff in advance that they had this email, and they told all the staff that this was happening. But that the transcript is highlighted is from the ambulance service. And they've had a call from the staff at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. I can hear helicopters above and also a loud bang. We're wondering if anything was going on in the area. They advised them that there was an ongoing military exercise. Right? So the staff didn't know, because I believe the first freedom of information they gave us, that they had no prior warning, was the truth. So moving on to slide 43, because we carried on pressing them to get this email from them. And then they said, we would also like to reiterate, there are no requirements to keep details of notifications of exercises. So they don't even have the email, Martin. So how can they give us an excerpt from an email they don't even have? Well, I'm trying to get through these as quickly as possible. One of the other people that said that they received prior notification was the Royal Mint. And they said, whilst we received prior notification of the training exercise you refer to from the Welsh Extremism Counter-Terrorism Unit, the Royal Mint had no involvement in respect to the exercise whatsoever, and our premises were not used in any way. The exercise had no impact on our security systems or alarms, and any road closures had no effect on us either. Well, we pressed them, because this is actually two freedom of informations, to show us proof that they had prior notification. And they said, this is the Royal Mint. We have no paperwork or documented evidence of notification of this event. We were informed verbally, and given the passing of time and lack of written notification, were unable to be more specific as to the date and time of the notification. This is the Royal Mint, one of the most protected buildings anywhere in the world. There are military-grade explosives going off outside, and nobody checked. So I wanted to find out about this, because now we knew who we had to ask. So the next slide, slide 45, is indeed to South Wales Police. 11 times we asked for this information. I wish to request information pertaining to training exercises. Could you please confirm whether you were or weren't conducting counter-terrorism training exercises in Llantrisant or the local vicinity for South Wales between the 25th and 26th of February 2016? If the answer is yes, what time or times did these exercises take place? Did these exercises take place, and roughly for how long? Were the local population informed that counter-terrorism exercises were taking place during the requested time above? And can you please give any details as to what equipment was used, and how much did these exercises disturb the local population? 11 times, Martin, we asked that question.
Can I excuse me just 1 second? I wanted to say goodbye to everyone over at KGRA Radio. We'll be back next week with Jonathan Weigart and Michael Herrera. Thank you very much over there at KGRA Radio. I'm sorry. Now continue on. Yeah.
In their response, which is in two stages here, South Wales Police can neither confirm or deny that it holds any information with regard to your request. In the Freedom of Information document, they either have to confirm they have the information or they deny they hold it, but they cannot say we can neither confirm or deny. Anyway, they tried to hide behind national security and law enforcement. The security of the country is paramount to the importance, and South Wales Police will not divulge whether the information is or is not held, as it would undermine the national security or compromise law enforcement. The threat of terrorism cannot be ignored. It should be recognised that the international security landscape is increasingly complex and unpredictable. The UK has faced a sustained threat from violent terrorists and extremists. And more recently, the threat has increased, where in recent years we've had numerous terrorist atrocities. The current threat level to the UK is substantial, which means an attack is likely. Yeah, to me, probably. So I wrote back to them, and you're going to like this, Martin. I've missed my calling.
And is that number 47, slide 47?
The very next one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Dear South Wales Police, thank you for your response to my Freedom of Information request, requesting whether you conducted a counter-terrorism exercise on the 25th and 26th of February 2016 in the Llantrisant area of South Wales. You quoted two exemptions, national security and law enforcement. Having given your exemptions some consideration and wholeheartedly agreeing that national security should be a priority, I do not agree that your exemptions are valid in this case. You state to disclose whether or not the information is held would undermine the force's capabilities, which consequently be detrimental to the ability to deal with the ongoing terrorist threat we face. It would be counterproductive to place the information into the public domain about any counter-terrorism exercises, which would inform the general public, especially those with malintent, that counter-terrorism tactics, techniques and procedures would have been on display or will be in the future. Counter-terrorism operations, by their very nature, are fundamental to the safety and protection of the country and the public at large. Therefore, to confirm or deny this information is held negatively impacting tactics, techniques and procedures, which is not in the public interest. And the letter continues with the very next slide, slide 48.
Yep.
On the 28th of June 2016, in the Llantrisant area of South Wales, you did indeed conduct a police counter-terrorism exercise in some disused warehouses adjacent to the Royal Mint on Llantrisant Common. A letter was issued and sent to all residents of Llantrisant and the surrounding areas to warn of this exercise in advance. Posters were also erected giving notice of the aforementioned exercise. Did the rules for national security or your ability to police not apply then, or indeed the public interest? This is just one example of police counter-terrorism exercises being announced in advance, where they were advertised on the mainstream media, on television and on local radio stations. Surely notifying people in advance, sometimes months in advance, would be a risk to national security? I'm asking you about an alleged exercise that took place 7 years ago and would in no way impact national security or your techniques and procedures. Police counter-terrorism exercises have always been announced in advance in every major city in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. They've also been announced on a Europe-wide counter-terrorism exercise in advance. This subject has never been a secret until now, for these two dates specifically. You mentioned several times your tactics, techniques and procedures. I'm not asking you for any of those, but here is a link to a video on YouTube where a senior police officer is giving a running commentary of the police in action during one of your counter-terrorism exercises. And that link is the Assistant Commissioner herself. This is just one example, but there are many more which I can provide on request. I feel you are deliberately trying to avoid my question, which is reasonable, and if national security or your ability to police did not apply in the country's capital and in every major city in the United Kingdom and across the whole of Europe and the rest of the world, why then will you not answer any of my questions regarding the 25th and 26th of February 2016 in the Llantrisant area of South Wales? And the next slide, which is the end of the letter, which is number 49. If you do not answer my request, I will ask for an internal review, providing more evidence if necessary. If that fails, I will lodge a complaint with the Police Complaints Committee and my MP. In the famous words of the late great President J.F. Kennedy, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. The law requires that you answer me, and the exemptions you have given have never applied. Police counter-terrorism exercises have always been advertised in advance on the mainstream news, in the media, on the internet and on the radio. I would appreciate a very quick and timely reply and not leave me waiting the lawful time allowed. This request is something that will be dealt with quick time. So we asked for an internal review. In fact, number 50, slide 50, this is a copy of the letter that was sent to everybody regarding the police counter-terrorism exercise that took place in June of 2016. The exercise that the hospital tried to merge with what happened in February of 2016, trying to make it look like it was the same event when it wasn't. Because I think they just want people's memories or expect people's memories to fade So when they think back to 2016, they can, oh yeah, we all had a letter, and they put up posters, but this is something separate. So I just wanted to show that, because that was the letter that was sent to everybody. So we asked for an internal review, the same questions. So I won't bother with slide 51, but slide 52 was their answer from the internal review. And they said an internal review has now been conducted in a fair and impartial manner, and our original position is upheld. This is South Wales Police, a self-governing police force, and nothing is fair and impartial. I always said South Wales Police should be answerable to a higher authority, but they went on to say, if you remain dissatisfied with this response, you have the right to direct your complaint to the Information Commissioner's Office using the attached contact details. Well, unluckily for them, the attached contact details didn't work. So Gary and I went to the Information Commissioner's Office directly, which is the very next slide. And they don't take on everyone's case, because they can't. You have to submit your evidence to them. And after we submitted our evidence to the Information Commissioner's Office, they said our complaint is important to us and is now eligible for investigation. This is South Wales Police under investigation for contempt. And that's contempt of court. That's 2 years in prison, a £5,000 fine, or both, for every single police officer that failed to answer us. Okay? And they did investigate them, and they did have to answer us. And the very next slide is from Jeremy Vaughan, number 54, Chief of Police from South Wales Police, from the ICO complaint, when the case number is there. Inquiries have been made to the counter-terrorism unit, and they have confirmed that no information is held in relation to this. So there were no counter-terrorism exercises on the 25th and 26th of February 2016. So why did the Royal Mint and why did the hospital change their story and say that there was, when no such exercise ever took place? Moving on, because I've not finished with South Wales Police yet. Slide 55. This is regarding road closures. And we asked them, a number of roads were closed off during the exercise and around the Royal Glamorgan Hospital in Smilock Woods. Who exactly gave the order? Why was it necessary to close the roads? And whose job was it to close the roads during this time, at the time stated? And again, for the 25th and the early hours of the 26th of February 2016. And they refused to answer us and said that it was vexatious, which means it's worrisome or troublesome to people. We're asking about road closures from 8 years ago, and they're telling us that's worrisome to people. So we asked for an internal review, which is the very next slide, slide 56. And this is hilarious, Martin, even you'll get this. An internal review has now been carried out in a fair and impartial manner, and I do not agree that Section 14 exemption applies. Again, asking about the road closures, and they have said, quote, we have been unable to locate any recorded information in relation to any road closures on the date specified. The officers involved have since left the organisation and other inquiries have been unsuccessful. Oh. Martin, please tell me, how do they know who's involved?
All right.
All right. Jeez. So it's ridiculous. Even though I could do better than that. I think they got the office clerk to answer that one. Going back to this training over private land, we've all seen the cover of that. So we'll go straight on to the next one, 58.
Okay.
Excuse me. Units must pay particular attention to the prevention of noise, especially during silent hours like 4:30 in the morning, yeah? And similarly, exercises are not to be planned in areas where disturbance would be caused to local inhabitants in their homes. So that would include Llantrisant at 4:30 in the morning. But the best one for me is the very next one, which is the MOD's own avoidance policy. There are no uninhabited areas of the UK large enough to meet our essential training needs. In principle, the whole of the UK is available for low-flying bi-military aircraft to provide sufficient training airspace whilst reducing the potential for disturbance as far as possible. In practice, military low-flying is not conducted in certain areas, In particular, our aircraft do not conduct low flying within the controlled airspace surrounding civil airports. Well, Cardiff International is just up the road where the Apache helicopter had to do an emergency landing. And also to avoid overflying centres of population of more than 10,000 inhabitants. Llantrisant alone has over 13,000 inhabitants, and not including the surrounding villages. But the most important one, in addition, there are restrictions placed on the overflight of specific industrial, where the Royal Mint sits on an industrial estate, medical, the Royal Glamorgan Hospital was right there, and other key establishments. And those key establishments are royal households, and that would include the Royal Mint. They ignored their own avoidance policy that night. But it gets better. Slide 60, the public right of way. And I'm getting to, there is a reason for this because I want to get on to witness testimony. Service personnel on foot are entitled to use these public facilities in the same way as civilians, but must not monopolize the area. If a public right of way crosses an area of private land used for training over private land, it must remain open to the public. There is no legal mechanism to close a public right of way for an exercise. But those men in Smailog Woods were assaulted. So I asked the Ministry of Defence, because by this time I am completely fed up. What person, organisation or public body did you receive written permission from to conduct this exercise over private land?
Hang on just 1 second, please. What slide number are we on? I think I
Sorry.
Skipped one.
I know, I think you were on it then. It would be slide 61.
Yes, okay. All right, thank you.
The Ministry of Defence does not hold the information that you require. What information was given to the local community or local government for such a loud and disturbing exercise over a congested area? Again, the Ministry of Defence does not hold the information that you require. Were any restrictions placed upon you by the landowner, organisation or public body prior to this exercise? Again, the Ministry of Defence does not hold the information you request. What written permission did you receive to land your helicopters in silent hours in a congested area? Again, the Ministry of Defence does not hold the information you request. And finally, can you supply a copy of the detailed recce, including a photocopy of the map and routes? And yet again, the Ministry of Defence don't have a single piece of paperwork for this multi-billion-pound operation that went on that night in what they call silent hours. They cannot provide a single piece of paperwork for it. Well, one of the sticking points from my not so learned friends was about a NOTAM that was posted. And I want to go straight to slide 63 first. And this is regarding the two aircraft, Snake 48 and its partner, that were here in the days preceding. And these are multiple Freedom of Informations. I'll just sort of try to get it down in some concise manner. I sent this request off on the 28th of September 2018. After nearly 2 years and 6 months, I've not seen or been notified of any reply, which you're lawfully obliged to do after 20 to 40 days. Military planes were seen circling on the 23rd and 24th of February 2016 into Llantrisant and Pentyrch areas. Why was no NOTAM issued for these dates? That's a notice to airmen. And the Ministry of Defence tell us that they held no information about that about those aircraft. So after nearly 3 years, we wrote again and we asked, could you please tell me why your plane, ZZ418 Hawker Beechcraft, was spotted by witnesses flying in circles and figure eight formations in Pentyrch, South Wales, from the 22nd of February 2016 till the 26th of February 2016. This plane was also identified on public internet flight radar websites, and then the information was withheld under Section 26. That was the first time we'd had any acknowledgement by the government that those planes were ever here, and they gave us a Section 26.
Wow.
No exercise has ever been listed for those aircraft. No NOTAM has ever been posted for those aircraft. But there was a NOTAM that was inserted, and it's on the official MOD website, Ministry of Defence website, which is slide 64. And it's been highlighted in blue. All Ministry of Defence exercises have the date it was posted and the date it will commence. For example, 10th of March, added MOD sponsored air exercise listed commencing 14th of March, and so on and so forth, except for the one inserted on the 25th of February 2016, and it was added as a new MOD sponsored air exercise, but it wasn't there on the night. It was there the following morning.
Yeah. Jeez.
So I wanted to know more about this NOTAM because it's been a sticking point with what I call my not so learned friends. And they did go into some detail about it, which is the next slide, slide 65.
Hang on just a minute. It's not in the right order. Here we go.
Slide 65.
Yep.
On the left is the map of the actual NOTAM. And a NOTAM is a boundary, an excluded piece of airspace for any other air traffic to stay out of. On the map on the right, the yellow circle would have been the NOTAM boundary. They're not allowed to fly within 3 nautical miles of its boundary. And the red circle on the map on the right is where they actually went. According to the NOTAM, all air traffic must come down the estuary and then fly into the NOTAM area. What they did here was they pursued those objects west and continued to pursue them west up to 50 miles, over 50 miles outside of the NOTAM boundary, something they would never have done in an exercise. But they did that night. And all of their transponders were turned off.
Really? The transponders were off?
Yes. This is why we've only got the radar returns from the 2 reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft, because all of the transponders were off.
Oh.
Well, we decided to find out a lot more about this NOTAM. So going on to the very next slide, slide 66. This is from the National Air Traffic Services. That anybody should know about this NOTAM. They should know. I'm making a request for information on a NOTAM, which was listed for Exercise Chameleon, conducted in February 25th and 26th, 2016. The area in which this took place was in South Wales, an area of the UK. Could you please provide with the following: what time was this application made for the NOTAM? Could you please provide a list of what aircraft and vehicles were listed? At what time did the official NOTAM get issued for this area? And could you please provide a map for the NOTAM outlining the borders and boundaries for said exercise? And they wrote back to us and said, thank you for your inquiry about this historic NOTAM for the 25th and 26th of February 2016. And they've been unable to find any information relating to this specific NOTAM. No, because it was never planned. So we asked the Ministry of Defence, because they're the people who allegedly posted this NOTAM. And that's the very next slide. Yes. We are treating, this is their answer. We're treating your correspondence as a request for information under the Freedom of Information Act. A search for the information has now been completed within the Ministry of Defence, and I can confirm that no information in the scope of your request has been found. I can advise that the MOD submits NOTAMs for certain military exercises to the Civil Aviation Authority at least 5 days prior to a military exercise. So we wrote to the Civil Aviation Authority. These are the people in charge of your airspace when you're flying off on your holidays. And the same questions: what time was the application made? Could you please provide a list of aircraft and vehicles? What time did the official NOTAM get issued for this area? And could you please provide a map for the NOTAM outlining its borders and boundaries? And they wrote back to us and said, following a review of held information, it's now been determined that the Civil Aviation Authority holds no information within the scope of your request. So the NOTAM was never, ever planned. Now, I don't know if you want to get into some of the other primary witnesses. I don't think that's necessary at this point. But
actually, I am kind of interested in the other witnesses, but I mean, if you want to move on and kind of close this out, that's fine as well.
We can go back to the witnesses, but slide 71.
I do not have slide 71. I've looked everywhere for it, so I apologize for that. You can talk about it, but I don't have it.
It's a shame because this.
Let me see. Reopen this whole zip file and see if I can find it that way. Go right ahead, and I'll see if
this is from Air Command Secretariat. This is the Secretariat of the Ministry of Defence. There is no higher authority. The only higher authority is the king. And we've written to him. And we asked, I wish to make a freedom of information request, please. Could you please confirm if any information is held within the Ministry of Defence, the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, or any office that might hold information pertaining to any day or night military exercises or day or night low-flying exercises for the area of South Wales for the time of February of 2016. I am treating your correspondence as a request for information under the Freedom of Information Act. A search for the information has now been completed within the Ministry of Defence, and I can confirm that no information in the scope of your request is held. There were no programmed air defence exercises in South Wales in February of 2016. So why were they here? And how did I know? Because I saw it. On the morning of the 26th of February 2016, I made a comment on Wales Online. And I didn't know you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs. I'm not a ufologist. I wasn't then. And I'm not now, really. My interest has been in getting the truth out about this case. There were no exercises. There were no counter-terrorism exercises. The cover story to cover the cover story.
There's definitely a lot of like the shell game. They're trying to pass it off to each other, and where's the hidden nugget? Who knows?
If it were a police counter-terrorism exercise, why were the police telling the public that it was a military exercise?
Yeah,
a military exercise that was never listed and never actually happened.
Now, are you a barrister or solicitor?
Gary calls me Barrister Clarke.
Yeah.
He says I missed my calling in life because I don't leave a stone unturned.
Yes, I would hate to be up against a legal challenge with you. I'll put it that way.
I take that as a compliment. Thank you, Martin. But the final slide on here, which you should have,
is 72.
Is 72.
Yeah.
And I just want to show this to people because these are some of the objects that came out of the pyramid that night. The metadata is on the middle slide, the 26th of February 2016 at 2:33 a.m. These are some of the barrel-shaped objects that were actually photographed by the Cole Winston witness. I've not read their statement out, but I do have their public statement here. These were the objects that were herded west, 50 miles outside of the NOTAM area. They shot 3 down, 2 barrels. They shot down, 1 crashed into the road and shattered into 1,000 pieces. They shot the green object down, which crashed into Smilog Woods. And, they were arresting people and stopping people from going through Smilog Woods whilst the cleanup operation went on. And the rest of them were herded west. We have witnesses in Betws and Bridgend that saw military jets and helicopters pursuing a cluster of lights. That comment was made on the morning of the 26th in 2016. And I've spoken to that witness and I said, I know those lights weren't white. So what color were they? And he told me green. So I knew then that he'd seen them. And those objects were pursued through Neath and Port Talbot and Swansea and Gowerton and all the way out to sea. So God forbid what they did to them out there. But perhaps they didn't want to blow any more up over land because of the cleanup operation that was going on. You can go back to some of the witness testimonies if you want. I have a witness statement from a primary witness in Pentyrch. This is not David. This is another witness that saw the top of the pyramid from above the houses in front of her house. And she wrote, I don't know what the slide number is for this.
I may not have it. I can
slide
reload
69 if you do have it.
69. Yes, I do. Here it is.
Okay. This is from a primary witness in the village. She lives in the adjacent street, and so she was viewing this object from above the rooftops of the houses in front of her. She said, on Friday, the 26th of February 2016, I was woken up in the middle of the night by loud aircraft noise and very bright lights. I looked outside of the bedroom window over towards the fields behind the primary school in Tinnicoid Woods. I was concerned as the lights were so bright and the noise so loud, I thought an aircraft was crashing into the fields due to the low height. I continued to watch from the window at the bright lights combination of very bright white lights and red lights, trying to work out what was happening, when literally the lights went and the aircraft went. I couldn't decide if they went to ground or flew off. It happened quickly where I was. It looked as if one went to ground. I couldn't make out the amount of aircrafts as the lights were blinding, but there were a few by the different engine noises. I stayed still, watching, waiting for signs of a crash to decide whether to go out and help, but could not see any smoke or signs of a crash. It was bizarre, as we had very little sleep in our house, but the children didn't wake to this and slept all night. It was the only night since 2007 I have not had a child awake. This is something that still stands out as very odd to this day for us, as it's still the only night our children didn't wake. And that'll give you an idea of how low those aircraft were. Whilst I was standing on the gate, I had the two C-17s fly over the top of me, and they were flying wingtip to wingtip. So they broke minimum safe separation distances and minimum heights that night. In fact, they broke every aviation rule that night. And the only time that they can do that and get away with it is in a real combat situation. You know, got witnesses that stated that they were eyeballing the pilots of the helicopters out of their bedroom windows at eye level with the pilots. And I think they deliberately hovered low over people's homes, so perhaps they wouldn't hear the explosion. But it shook people's homes, and it shook the hospitals. And this is something that I want to get into with some of these witness testimonies. The Cole Winston witness testimony is a public statement, and it's slide 70, if you want to pop that one up for people.
Yeah, sure. I'll put that up. Here we go.
A family living in Cole Winston, a village in a rural setting situated southeast of Bridgend, was awoken just after 2 a.m. by their house vibrating. The house felt like it was shaking, and the noise, never heard it in my life, a very strange noise, almost felt like it was static feeling. The dog was barking and was described by witnesses as bonkers behavior, which was not characteristic. Through the window, the witnesses saw a large object flying over the house, roughly west to east, just over the rooftop. The object displayed a row of orange and red lights, and its underneath surface had a light green hue. A green light glow was seen leaving the main group of lights, and this descended into the fields in an area southeast of Cole Winston. During this time, witnesses managed to take several photographs on a mobile phone. About 6 to 7 minutes later, several aircraft that were heard flying overhead. Bright lights were seen, and what were thought to be Apache helicopters were heard flying around, which were dark and not displaying any navigation lights at 2:33 a.m. These were heard circling the area where the green lights had gone down for 5 to 6 minutes. These aircraft then headed off towards northeast, roughly in the direction of Llantrisant and Pentyrch area. Then all went quiet and the witnesses went back to bed. Following the incident, the official explanation that this had been a military exercise persuaded witnesses that this had been the case. But recently, on learning of the incident at Pentyrch, the witnesses checked the dates and times of the photos and realised that the incident they had experienced was on the same night and therefore must be linked in some way.
It's pretty, I mean, this is pretty solid, I have to say. And I guess I'm going to ask you, what would closure for you be? Because I know you have really made this your passion, and I'm glad you have, because you really moved the needle on this thing, where people, you know, are scrambling to cover it up. But what is closure to you? Is there any type of closure in this case for you?
There would be. I said all along that we would start a petition, Gary and I, for disclosure of UAPs and non-human intelligences. That was always my goal, to try and get disclosure. But it seems that 95% of the UFO community in the UK have not signed that petition. So what does that say? Only my followers have signed that petition. 95% of them have not. And some of these people would like to say that they're famous, self-serving, I call that. They don't want disclosure, clearly, because they'd be out of a job. I wouldn't celebrate if we did get disclosure, because it's going to change the earth as we know it. But after what the military are doing, I saw firsthand what they're doing. We could seriously be in trouble, and it affects us all. And I believe we do have a right to know. We should know what's going on. You know, the military can make their little wars in different countries as they have done. But when it affects us all equally, on a global scale, we should be informed. We are the people. We the people, not them, the elite. We the people. That's what it's about, us. And we should be told, because this is serious. You know, I have done, with Gary, we have done more than anyone before us. Anyone. This has been called, because there's a lot more evidence than this. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just to sort of bring you up to date with what's going on. I'm yet to challenge their Section 26s, but I intend to, because they have stated in their Condign reports, which was a secret study conducted by the Ministry of Defence and completed in the year 2000, where they state on numerous occasions, UFOs are of no defence significance and are not a threat. And if that's true, they cannot hide behind Section 26 defence in this case. And I will challenge each and every single one of their Section 26s, because I know the truth. I was there. I sat and passed 3 polygraph examinations.
Wow.
Not one.
Wow.
Passed.
So I just put in the chat room, if anyone has any questions directly for you, I can bring them up. You know, it's you've done a great job. I see Gary has been very active, and thank you, Gary, for being in the chat this whole
He's absolutely
evening.
brilliant, Gary. Absolutely brilliant. What a phenomenal, and I mean phenomenal investigator. He's, excuse me, been my right-hand man throughout all of this. This will probably be my last interview, and I'm so pleased to have done it with you, Martin. I have some health issues I need to sort out, and I want to spend some time with my family. But the investigation will never be over until we get disclosure in this country.
Right. Here's a nice little note here. Thank you, Caz, and much respect also to Gary. So someone just wants to know what you just kind of answered that. He probably typed at the same time you answered. You're going to sit back for a while with some issues and spend time with your family, which is good. Yeah. And speaking of time, both you and Gary must have 500 hours in working this case.
Well, it's been 8 years. It's a long time. Because, you know, they take so long to answer us. Yeah,
that must be frustrating. You're looking in your mailbox every day, you know, for
3 years to answer us about the aircraft that were here in the preceding days. You know, the number of attempts made to South Wales Police to get a simple answer. Either they were conducting an exercise or they weren't. And they weren't, even though they tried to hide behind 2 exemptions that simply don't apply. But I gave them a B+. I thought it was a good effort.
Now, when you said that night that this happened, and we're just about the end of the show, but that night that this happened, you tried to get, you know, to sleep, and then you heard the loud boom, you know, the explosion and all that. But did you feel like helpless, like you had nowhere to turn? I mean, it's the middle of the night. You probably tried to call at least the police. I'm not sure, but I mean, you probably tried to figure out who to call.
It was the same morning, but later. I mean, I didn't know that you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs. I made my comment on Wales Online to state, I can categorically state that was no exercise, you know. And I had the 2 debunkers, Agent Fox Mulder and the Smoking Man, that were military personnel at the ground level, seriously.
Oh, they were? Military?
Yes, they were military. And the military were at community level from the off. You had people in local hubs, and you have to be a resident of the area to be in the hub. making a simple one-liner. It was a military exercise with no follow-up, no explanation before the mainstream media knew it was a military exercise.
There
Okay,
you
so
go. That's tell all. A question for you. Now, I know your phone was going dead, but did you try? And I remember in the first interview you mentioned that you tried to get an image of the barrel things, right? I mean, that's
right.
when. But I understand what it's like being in the middle of an encounter and how your camera is something you're not thinking of. You're trying to absorb what
No,
you're seeing.
your cognitive function just ceases. I'd never expected. I'd never seen a UFO before. I never expected that. You know, what started off as one red light, then suddenly becoming three, and then you just get this huge craft coming through. I stood in complete shock and awe, really, of what I was witnessing. It didn't actually occur to me to try and film these things until the barrels were right next to me.
Yeah.
And then when I took my phone out of my pocket, it wouldn't work at all. We don't know if that was something to do with the EMF from the craft or something to do with the E3 Sentry that also equally has jamming capabilities, and which is part of, you know, what it can do. I don't have images of the pyramid. What we do have is the EMF, extremely high EMF that was still harmful to human beings 20 months after the event. Took 5 years to dissipate. The beta radiation that was found there, which, as you know, is decaying gamma radiation, which is still there. We do know what aircraft were involved: the Apaches, the Lynx, the Pumas, the Merlins, the Chinooks, that took something from Smilog Woods, the Chinooks, that night. They were being escorted then by 2 Apache helicopters because the third one had to do the emergency landing at Cardiff International. We do have a picture of that, which is slide 17, because the explosion was so big and so loud. It registered on the Richter scale 40 miles away in Monmouthshire. This was not a simulated munition. Simulated munitions have no kinetic energy at all. At all. I have seen more smoke and more noise from a firework than I have seen from their simulated munitions. And as I said, you can't place one in the air. And that was published in the press. And I have the press clipping, which I believe is slide 9.
Okay, let me just put this up first. Oh, this didn't.
Right, that's the Apache helicopter that
Okay.
had to do the emergency landing at Cardiff International just minutes after the huge explosion, with its cockpit on fire.
Oh, I see it. Wow. Yeah.
Right, with its
And
cockpit on fire.
I thought you said slide 14, but the other one, I got that wrong, I guess.
Slide 9
Slide
is
9. Okay, let me see if I have
from the
that.
Mirror, which is a national paper here.
Yep.
Terrified neighbours in a country village wake during the night to sound of explosions and fighter jets. Villagers were terrified when they awoke to sounds of explosions in the sky, not on the ground, in the sky. And of course, the military's defence had no permission to be using simulated munitions and pyrotechnics by the landowner, because neither of the landowners or the Welsh government or local government knew anything about it. This was not an exercise. This was real life, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They set an ambush to, $4.5 billion worth of equipment. It's no small you could go and watch a military exercise. They set up public platforms for you to go and watch these things. In the morning, there might be a couple of flybys by 2 aircraft. You might see some parachute drops in the afternoon, but you will not see £3.8 billion worth of equipment or $4.5 billion worth of equipment and in the air and all at the same time over a civilian area next to a hospital, next to the Royal Mint, in what they call silent hours.
Yes, I'm sorry. One last question I would like to ask you. In this area, that shows a broken tree right there, but
that's the canopy of it. Yeah.
Yeah. When you went there, did you see like any type of rubble on the ground or any burn marks or anything like that?
There were burn marks on the surrounding trees. It was snowing at the crash site. And it was snowing in what we call the near landing field where the pyramid emerged. And only in those places, like only in the one field where the pyramid came in, it wasn't snowing in the surrounding fields. I remember standing on the edge of the field and watching the snow fall in front of me, but not on me, like a child, you know, which was really bizarre. But it wasn't like proper snow. It was almost like pellets, if you like. You could squeeze it and it wouldn't melt. It would dissolve into nothing. And the same at the crash site. It was snowing there, but nowhere else.
Very interesting.
And it wasn't forecast for snow either. I do believe I may have sent you the weather forecast for the week, and the conditions were not conducive with snow. I don't think I did, because I was trying to keep
That's
it.
okay. Sure. Yeah.
You know, there's
But,
so much. This is just a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Gary and I wrote the book, which is the Pentyrch Incident, the greatest UFO cover-up of modern times, because it's the first 5 years of the investigation to protect the integrity of the investigation. And it has all the witness statements. It has more photographs of the crash site and debris trail in there. And if you have Prime on Amazon, it's absolutely free. If you've got Kindle, it's free. So please get it. Please read it. This is just like the top up, really. But there is so much. I couldn't get it all in the time that we've got. To be honest with you, Martin, it's phenomenal the amount of information we've got. But we can prove the lies, and we can prove they broke the rules.
Well, we saw right there on the screen. Well, thank you so much, Caz, and I hope your health. I hope you do well, whatever you do, and I hope you get some rest, because I can certainly see you were really involved in this and took a lot of time to do what you did. And I appreciate the way you went after this thing. It's I don't think I can ever think of anyone, you know, I mean, John Greenwald Jr. does the FOIAs. He's really good at that, but I haven't seen anyone else attack it like you did in this situation.
Well,
you wouldn't let it go. Either you or Gary would let it go. And I think that's
because
really
they can't
important.
lie to me, because I was there.
Yeah.
I must be the proverbial thorn in their side.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I saw it. So each freedom of information we put in, I was quite intrigued to see what story they were going to come up with next, you know.
Yeah, I bet. I bet.
But they can't lie to me, and we got them.
Yes. All right, guys, you take care.
Thank you, Martin.
All right. Okay, everyone. So thank you very much for watching. Again, the last video with the very high detail will be connected in the show notes and in the text below, YouTube, etc. And also in the show notes will be, I'm going to try to upload all those images. I tried, and my website was acting like it didn't want to take all those images, but I'll work on that. So that will be under the show notes link in the podcast, etc. And remember, next week we have Jonathan Wygant and Mike Herrera on, and should be a real special show. Until then, keep your eyes to the sky.